In this episode, we're going to take a look at the beginnings of one of the greatest power players in the history of the ancient Near East, specifically the Assyrians. The popular perception of the Assyrians is one of brutal conquerors. This, though, actually masks their many accomplishments in science, art, the preservation of knowledge, administration, military tactics, and their overall profound influence on the history of the world, not only during their time, but for centuries to come. However, before we get into all of these topics and more, let's start with the very beginnings of Assyrian history, at least of their recorded history. Most scholars divide up ancient Assyrian history into three main phases or periods that generally correspond with the establishment and decline of various kingdoms. These are the Old Assyrian period, the Middle Assyrian period, and the Neo-Assyrian period. Assyrian history really starts with a town called Ashur, whose early history is obscure at best. Though the exact date of its founding is a mystery, the initial reason for it may have been due to the fact that being on a hill, it was easier to defend from attack. The town, which would eventually become a city, was also an important religious center, but whether it became a sacred place or a fortress-type settlement first is unknown. Ashur's location, though, was pretty far removed from the main centers of power further south. While there is no reference to it in any Sumerian records from the early dynastic period, there is a broken statue from the Akkadian period dating to around 2250 BCE that was found in the ruins of a temple. Believed to be that of the Akkadian king Manishtushu, it's not known whether it was specifically commissioned in Ashur or was later brought there many years later as a sort of trophy. However, the first known inscription from Ashur was found in the temple of Ishtar and commissioned by a certain Ititi, who was probably the Akkadian governor of the region that included Ashur. It reads, "Ititi, the ruler, son of Iakulaba, with fervent prayer to Ishtar." While the exact date of this inscription can't be determined, others from the Neo-Sumerian era can. Well, perhaps not an exact date, but a pretty good estimate. For example, there is one inscription from a certain Zerikam, who was the governor of Ashur, that was dedicated to Amar-Sin, the third king of the Neo-Sumerian Empire. This shows that at least by the year 2040 BCE, Ashur was under the influence of the kings of Ur. However, with the Neo-Sumerian Empire's breakdown and the arrival of Amorite tribes from the east, the cities of northern Mesopotamia had to fend for themselves. Around 2025 BCE, Ashur became independent of Ur, and most likely, locals of Akkadian origin took power. Thus, the Old Assyrian Kingdom was born. Keep in mind, though, that at the time, the term Assyria only meant the city of Ashur, with the word Assyrian simply meaning a resident of Ashur. Actually, Assyria is the Greek name. The true name is Mat Ashur, meaning land of Ashur, as in the god Ashur. Later on, the terms would be expanded to include all of the lands and peoples that were governed from Ashur, or the later capitals of Kalhu, Nineveh, Dur-Shurukin, and so on. However, around the year 2000 BCE, Ashur was just a city-state that also functioned as a regional trade center. In theory, the city of Ashur had no king. It was ruled by the god Ashur. The city and the god had the same name. The human ruler of the city was technically not the king, but the god Ashur's representative. This representative of the god governed in conjunction with a sort of city assembly or council, similar to the system that was used many centuries later in cities such as Athens, or what the early Senate was like in Rome. While the Assyrian king list mentions several early kings, describing them as those who were ancestors or those who lived in tents, the first real historical king of Ashur to establish a dynasty was Puzur-Ashur I. And this is pretty much as detailed as his biography gets. With the exception of their temple dedication and building activities, the same is mostly true for his most immediate descendants, Shalim-Ahum, Ilu-Shuma, Irishim I, and Ikunum. Perhaps though evidence of the activities and priorities of these early kings may not be found in their inscriptions, but rather with what the city of Ashur had become in the decades just after its independence from Ur. While initially the city's role may have been a religious or administrative one, Ashur soon became a prime conduit for trading goods between Anatolia and the lands further to the east. The majority of these goods consisted of tin and textiles. Merchants from Ashur established numerous colonies along key trade routes that linked the city with the towns and kingdoms of eastern and central Anatolia. To date, there have been at least 20 towns or kingdoms in eastern and central Anatolia where such colonies have been found, but there were probably many more. One of these cities was Knecht, also known as Nisa or Nesha. Though today it's just east of the modern Turkish city of Kayseri, in ancient times it was about 1,200 kilometers away from Ashur. This would have taken your typical Assyrian trading caravan 5 to 6 weeks just to get there. Of all of the merchant colonies that we know about, Knecht seems to have been the most prominent. There have been well over 20,000 cuneiform documents and letters that have been discovered there. These detail the trading activity and lives of the various Assyrian merchants who once occupied its walls. Commercial and trading activity at most colonies basically went like this. Tin, an important but relatively scarce commodity, along with high-quality textiles, were imported into Anatolia by donkey caravans that were financed by groups of Assyrian businessmen. These businessmen established branch offices in the Anatolian colonies, usually staffed by members of their family or clan, where they would trade such items for precious metals such as silver, gold, and copper. For the most part, this system worked as long as there was political stability in Anatolia. When this more or less ended around the mid-1700s BCE, so too did most of the colonies, and it's likely that the Assyrian merchants came back to Ashur. So I hope that this gives you an idea of how both the city of Ashur and essentially the kingdom of Assyria developed. In the next episode, we'll see how this kingdom expanded under Shamsi-Adad I. Once again, thank you so much for joining me. I really hope you learned something, and if you did, please hit that like button because it helps the channel out tremendously. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode.